The training hall smelled like sweat and metal. Riley Bennett sat in the back row of the observation deck, her notebook open but mostly empty. She preferred watching to writing during these demonstrations. Around her, cadets from 24 different species whispered and shifted in their seats. Some had scales, others had fur, and a few glowed faintly in the dim light. Riley was one of only 7 humans in her class at the Galactic Military Academy. Down on the main floor, instructors were setting up the combat circle for afternoon sparring sessions. Riley had already completed her required matches for the week. She'd won 3, lost 1, and earned a draw against a Vortian whose bone density made him nearly impossible to knock down. Her strategy was always the same: study the opponent, find the pattern, exploit the weakness. It worked more often than not. The doors at the far end of the hall burst open with a metallic clang. Conversation died instantly. General Torvak entered like a storm given form. He stood nearly 8 feet tall, his body covered in dark gray scales that looked like natural armor. Scars crisscrossed his face and neck, and his right arm had been replaced with a cybernetic limb that hummed with barely contained power. He wore the crimson and black uniform of the Dracan Empire, medals covering his chest like a shield of past victories. Riley had heard stories about Torvak. Everyone had. He'd commanded fleets in the border wars, held a planetary defense alone for 6 days, and once killed an enemy commander in single combat while his own legs were broken. He was a legend, a hero to billions, and notoriously brutal in his methods. Behind him walked 3 aides, struggling to match his pace. The Academy's head instructor, Commander Vrel, rushed forward to greet him. They spoke briefly, Vrel's antenna drooping in what Riley recognized as nervous deference. Whatever Torvak said made Vrel's skin change from blue to pale green. "Attention!" Vrel's voice crackled through the speakers. "General Torvak has honored us with his presence to observe training protocols. All cadets will demonstrate appropriate military bearing." Riley straightened in her seat along with everyone else. Torvak's eyes swept across the observation deck, studying each cadet like a predator evaluating prey. His gaze lingered on the humans longer than the others. Riley felt his attention pass over her, and something cold settled in her stomach. Torvak descended to the main floor. The instructors had been running standard tactical simulations, reviewing footage from yesterday's exercises. He watched for several minutes in silence, his expression growing darker. Finally, he held up one massive hand. "Stop," his voice carried without need for amplification. "Show me the defensive formation from Scenario 7. The instructors scrambled to pull up the correct file. Footage played on the central holo display, showing a mixed team of cadets responding to a simulated ambush. Riley recognized herself in the formation. She'd taken the rear guard position, covering the team's retreat, while 2 Krellian students provided suppressive fire. Torvak watched the entire sequence without blinking. When it ended, he turned to Commander Vrel. "That human in the rear position. Bring her down here." Riley's heart stopped. She looked around, hoping he meant one of the other humans, but Vrel was already looking directly at her. "Cadet Bennett, report to the floor." The walk down the stairs felt like descending into an arena. Every eye in the hall followed her. Riley kept her expression neutral, her breathing steady. Whatever was about to happen, she wouldn't give anyone the satisfaction of seeing fear. She stopped 3 paces from Torvak and saluted. Up close, he was even more imposing. His scales had a faint, oily sheen, and his cybernetic arm clicked softly with each micro-movement. "Your name?" Torvak said. "Cadet Riley Bennett, sir. Earth contingent, 2nd year." "Earth." He made the word sound like an insult. "I watched your performance in that scenario. You retreated. The tactical objective required protecting the team's intelligence officer, sir. Retreat was the optimal strategy. Retreat is what the weak do when they cannot fight." Torvak began circling her slowly. "I have reviewed Earth's admission file to the Coalition. Your species is fragile. Weak bone structure, minimal natural defenses, poor sensory capabilities compared to every other member species. Tell me, Cadet Bennett, why should the Coalition waste resources training humans for military service?" Riley's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice level. Humans bring different capabilities to the coalition, sir. We adapt quickly to changing circumstances. Adaptation is what species do when they are too weak to dominate. Torvak stopped in front of her, looking down from his considerable height. The galaxy does not need more prey animals playing soldier. It needs warriors. Murmurs rippled through the observation deck. Some aliens looked uncomfortable. The human cadets looked angry. Riley noticed Commander Vrel shifting nervously, but he said nothing. Torvak was too high-ranking, too decorated to challenge. With respect, General, the coalition values diversity of approach in military strategy. Does it? Torvak's smile showed too many teeth. Then let us test this diversity. You and I will spar. Standard Academy rules. If your human adaptability is so valuable, demonstrate it. Riley's mind raced. This wasn't a request. Refusing would confirm everything he'd said about human weakness. Accepting meant facing one of the most dangerous warriors in the galaxy. She was 22 years old, weighed 130 pounds, and had exactly 2 years of military training. I would prefer not to, sir. The match would be inappropriate given our ranks. I'm giving you a direct order, Cadet. Step into the circle or admit that humans have no place in this academy. The room held its breath. Riley looked at Commander Vrel one last time, hoping for intervention that she knew wouldn't come. The commander looked away. Riley turned back to Torvak and nodded once. Yes, sir. She walked to the combat circle as Torvak removed his ceremonial cape, revealing more scars beneath. His cybernetic arm recalibrated with a series of mechanical whirs. Around the circle, the safety barriers activated, their blue glow creating a cage. Riley stepped inside and took her position. Across from her, Torvak cracked his neck and smiled like something ancient and hungry. The referee's voice announced the start. The crowd fell silent. Torvak began moving forward, and Riley knew her life was about to change forever. The combat circle hummed to life beneath Riley's feet. Blue energy barriers rose around them, creating a cylindrical arena 15 meters across. Standard Academy rules appeared on the holographic displays. First incapacitation wins. Lethal force prohibited. Referee override enabled for safety. Riley had fought in this circle dozens of times, but never against someone like Torvak. The general rolled his shoulders, his cybernetic arm flexing with mechanical precision. He outweighed her by at least 300 pounds, maybe more. His reach advantage was obvious, and the scars covering his body told stories of battles that would have killed most beings. Around the observation deck, alien cadets leaned forward in their seats. She caught sight of David Park, one of her fellow humans, his knuckles white as he gripped the railing. Torvak didn't take a combat stance. He stood casually, almost lazily, as if this whole thing bored him. That was worse somehow than if he'd treated her like a real threat. The referee, an automated AI system, began its countdown. Combatants ready. Match begins in 3, 2, 1. Engage. Torvak charged immediately, closing the distance faster than Riley expected for someone his size. His cybernetic arm came up in a wide hook aimed at her head. It wasn't a skilled strike, just raw power designed to end things quickly. Riley ducked under it, feeling the air pressure of the blow pass over her. She circled right, keeping her movements tight and controlled. Her father's voice echoed in her memory from years ago on their ranch in Montana. Size don't mean nothing if you got leverage, Riley girl. Bull weighs 10 times what you do, but you can still put him where you want him. Torvak turned to face her, his expression showing mild annoyance. Running already? This is what humans do best, I suppose. Flee and hide. Riley didn't respond. She was studying him now, really watching. The way he favored his left leg slightly, probably an old injury that never healed quite right. How his cybernetic arm moved a fraction slower than his organic one, despite its power. The slight delay in his reactions when she moved to his right side. Information, all of it useful. He came at her again, this time with more purpose. A series of strikes, each one powerful enough to break bones. Riley evaded, blocked, redirected. Her arms stung from the impacts even when she deflected his blows. The crowd was making noise now, some cheering, others laughing. She heard a Krellian voice shout something about how long the fragile one will last. Torvak connected with a glancing strike to her shoulder. It wasn't even a direct hit, but the force spun Riley halfway around and sent her stumbling. Pain radiated down her arm. She barely kept her feet under her, rolling with the momentum rather than fighting it. The observation deck erupted in noise. Alien cadets were shouting now, some of them placing bets. She heard numbers being called out, time estimates. 30 seconds, 20 seconds. Some were betting she'd last less than 10 more seconds. Riley straightened, rolling her shoulder to test it. Nothing broken, just bruised. She could work with that. Her breathing remained steady, controlled. 4 counts in, 4 counts out, just like her mother had taught her in the dojo when she was 8 years old. Torvak stalked toward her, taking his time now. Is this the best Earth has to offer? I expected at least some entertainment. This is merely sad. Riley watched him approach, her mind processing everything she'd learned in the past 40 seconds. His patterns were becoming clear. He relied on strength and intimidation, expected opponents to panic or freeze. His technique was solid but predictable, refined through decades of fighting opponents who matched his style. But Riley wasn't going to fight his fight. She backed up 2 steps, then stopped, planted her feet, looked directly into his eyes. I was hoping you'd warm up first, General, she said quietly. The words hit him harder than any physical blow could have. His eyes widened slightly, then narrowed to dangerous slits. Around them, the crowd went silent. Even the cadets who'd been laughing stopped. Torvak's casual demeanor vanished. His scales seemed to darken, and his cybernetic arm began to hum with increased power. You dare mock me? Riley didn't answer. She adjusted her stance, weight balanced, hands ready. Her heart was pounding, but her mind felt clear. Crystal clear. This was the moment her mother had prepared her for in thousands of hours of training. Not the techniques themselves, but the mindset. The understanding that fighting wasn't about being stronger or bigger. It was about being smarter. Torvak launched himself at her with genuine aggression now. No more playing, no more testing. He came at her with the same fury he'd probably shown on actual battlefields. His strikes were faster, harder, combining power with the skill of a lifetime warrior. Riley met him head-on this time. She didn't retreat. Instead, she moved into his attacks, close enough that his reach advantage became a disadvantage. She struck at his joints, his pressure points, places most aliens didn't even know humans studied. A nerve cluster under his left arm, the soft tissue behind his knee, the gap where his scales met his cybernetic interface. None of the strikes did real damage, but they didn't need to. They were messages. Each one told Torvak the same thing. She knew exactly where to hurt him if she wanted to. His pattern shifted. Confusion entered his attacks. This wasn't how the fight was supposed to go. The weak human was supposed to fall, to break, to prove his point about Earth's inadequacy. In the observation deck, a Krellian sergeant who'd fought in the border war stood up suddenly. She's been analyzing him, he said to no one in particular. This whole time, she's been studying his patterns. Commander Vrel leaned forward, his skin shifting to deep purple, a color that meant intense focus in a species that on the floor. Torvak threw a massive overhead strike with his cybernetic arm, putting his full weight behind it. It was a finishing move, designed to crater the ground where Riley stood. But Riley wasn't there anymore. She'd stepped inside his reach, her body moving on pure, trained instinct. Her hand found the nerve cluster at the base of his neck, a spot where Dracan physiology had a weakness that few species knew about. She learned it in xenobiology class 6 months ago and filed it away in her memory. She pressed, twisted, and moved. Torvak's entire body seized. His massive overhead strike lost all coordination. His weight, his momentum, his strength, all of it suddenly working against him instead of for him. Riley pivoted, using basic physics and a whole lot of practice working with animals 10 times her size. She didn't lift Torvak. She redirected him, let gravity and momentum do the work. The general crashed to the mat with a sound like thunder, shaking the entire combat circle. Riley maintained her grip on the nerve cluster, keeping just enough pressure to ensure he couldn't immediately recover. His cybernetic arms spasmed, fingers opening and closing randomly. The AI referee's voice cut through the stunned silence. Incapacitation detected. Match concluded. Victory, Cadet Bennett. 3 seconds had passed since Torvak's overhead strike. In the observation deck, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Riley released her grip immediately and stepped back, offering her hand to help Torvak up. It was pure reflex, the polite thing to do after a sparring match. Torvak lay on his back, staring up at the ceiling, his chest heaving. His eyes slowly focused on Riley's offered hand. The silence in the training hall was absolute. Torvak stared at Riley's outstretched hand like it was a weapon. His scales had gone dark, almost black, which Riley had learned meant either extreme anger or humiliation in Draken physiology. Probably both. The general's cybernetic arm twitched as systems recalibrated, and his organic hand slowly clenched into a fist. Around them, the training hall remained frozen. Hundreds of cadets from dozens of species, all holding their breath. Riley kept her hand extended, her expression neutral and respectful. Her shoulder throbbed where he'd hit her earlier, and her legs were shaking from adrenaline, but she didn't let any of that show. "You dare!" Torvak's voice came out as a low growl. He pushed himself up without taking her hand, rising to his full height. Even with obvious effort to maintain dignity, his movements were slightly uncoordinated. The nerve strike had done its job. "You dare offer me pity?" Riley lowered her hand slowly. "Not pity, General. Respect. You're a decorated warrior. This was just a sparring match." The words seemed to make it worse. Torvak's jaw worked silently, his eyes burning with rage. Around them, the combat circle's barriers powered down with a soft hum. The match was over, but the damage was done. General Torvak, hero of the border wars, commander of fleets, slayer of enemies too numerous to count, had been defeated in seconds by a human cadet barely out of her teens. Without another word, Torvak turned and strode toward the exit. His gait was still slightly off, one leg not quite responding properly. His aides scrambled after him, their expressions panicked. The massive doors slammed shut behind them with a metallic boom that echoed through the hall. For 3 heartbeats, silence held. Then the entire academy erupted. Cadets jumped to their feet, shouting in a dozen languages. Some were cheering, others arguing, and several looked genuinely frightened. The human contingent was going wild, David Park pumping his fist in the air while others hugged each other. But many alien students looked troubled, whispering urgently to their neighbors. Riley stood alone in the center of the combat circle, suddenly feeling very exposed. Commander Vrel rushed down from the observation deck, his skin cycling through colors so fast it was almost strobing. Behind him came 3 other instructors, including Sergeant Dran, a massive Vortian who taught advanced combat tactics. "Cadet Bennett," Vrel's voice was tight. "Return to your quarters immediately. You are confined there until further notice." "Sir, that was not a request." Vrel's antennae were rigid, pointing straight back in what Riley had learned meant severe stress. "Sergeant Dran will escort you. Do not speak to anyone. Do not use your communicator. Is that understood?" Riley saluted. "Yes, sir." Dran fell in a step beside her as they headed for the exit. The 7-foot Vortian had skin like gray stone and rarely showed emotion. But as they walked through the parting crowd, he leaned down slightly. "That nerve strike," he rumbled quietly. "Where did you learn Drake and physiology weak points?" "Xenobiology 201, sir." Professor Telth covered it when discussing cross-species medical treatment. Dran made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Most cadets sleep through that class. You memorize pressure points." "I memorize everything, sir. Never know when information might be useful." They walked in silence through the academy corridors. Other cadets they passed stopped and stared, words spreading faster than Riley could walk. By the time they reached her quarters in the human wing, her communicator was buzzing nonstop despite Vrel's orders not to use it. Dran waited while she entered her room, a small space with a bunk, desk, and locker. "For what it matters," the sergeant said before leaving, "you fought well. Textbook use of leverage and opponent analysis. Your instructors should be proud." Then he was gone, and Riley was alone. She sat on her bunk and finally let herself shake. The adrenaline was crashing now, leaving her feeling hollow and slightly sick. She just humiliated one of the most powerful military figures in the coalition. In front of hundreds of witnesses, on academy grounds, her communicator continued buzzing. She checked it against her better judgment. Messages from her parents back on Earth. Somehow, they'd already heard. Messages from other human cadets. From alien students she barely knew. 3 from her xenobiology professor with crying laughing emoji that seemed wildly inappropriate. One message stood out. It was from Commander Vrel, sent just 2 minutes ago. Combat footage is being reviewed by Coalition High Command. Legal review in progress. Prepare for formal inquiry. Riley's stomach dropped. Formal inquiry meant this had gone way beyond academy discipline. This was political now. She lay back on her bunk and stared at the ceiling. Her mind kept replaying the fight. 3 seconds. That's all it had taken once she'd committed. 3 seconds to drop a general who'd fought in actual wars while she was still learning to read. But she hadn't been trying to humiliate him. She'd been trying to survive. He'd forced her into that circle, questioned her species' worth, made it clear that refusing would prove every negative thing he believed about humans. What was she supposed to do? Lose on purpose? Let him prove his point? Her communicator buzzed again. This time, it was a priority message from Earth Military Command. They wanted a full report within 6 hours. Someone named Admiral Rodriguez needed to speak with her directly. Another message came through, this one from an address she didn't recognize. She almost deleted it, then noticed the sender's designation, Coalition Intelligence Service. Against her better judgment, she opened it. Cadet Bennett, you have attracted attention. Not all of it is positive. General Torvak has many allies who share his views on human military participation. Your victory has made you a symbol. Symbols are dangerous. Be careful what you say in any inquiry. Trust no one except your chain of command. This message will delete itself in 30 seconds. Riley watched the countdown timer appear at the bottom of the message. 20 seconds. 15. She read it twice more, trying to understand what it meant. Who had sent it? Why would Coalition Intelligence care about a training hall sparring match? 5 seconds. The message dissolved into random characters, then vanished entirely. Someone knocked on her door. Riley sat up quickly. Enter. The door slid open to reveal a human woman in her 40s, wearing the uniform of an Earth diplomatic liaison. Her name tag read Ambassador Stevens. Cadet Bennett. We need to talk about what happens next. Riley stood and saluted. Mom. Stevens waved off the formality and closed the door behind her. In approximately 2 hours, you and General Torvak will be summoned to Coalition High Command. You'll both give testimony about today's incident. What you say in that room will affect not just your career, but possibly Earth's entire relationship with the Coalition. I was just defending myself, ma'am. He challenged me. I know. I've seen the footage. Everyone has seen the footage. It's already been broadcast to 17 different species news networks. Stevens pulled out a datapad and showed Riley the screen. News headlines in various alien languages, all showing frozen images of the fight. You're famous, Cadet, and that's a problem. Riley looked at the images. Her, standing over the fallen general. Her hand extended in respect while he glared up at her in rage. It looked worse than she remembered. What do I do? Stevens sat down on the desk chair, suddenly looking tired. You tell the truth. You stay calm. And you remember that you're not just representing yourself anymore. Whether you wanted it or not, you're representing all of humanity now. The weight of those words settled over Riley like physical pressure. She was 22 years old. She joined the academy to see the stars, to be part of something bigger than herself. She'd never wanted to be a symbol. They're going to ask you if you think General Torvak is right, Stevens continued. If humans are too weak for military service, you need to have an answer ready. Riley thought about her family's ranch, about wrestling half-ton cattle into pens, about her mother teaching her that strength wasn't about muscle, about her grandfather's war stories and his simple wisdom. Survive first, win second. I know what to say, ma'am. Stevens studied her for a long moment, then nodded. I believe you do. Get some rest, Cadet. Tomorrow is going to change everything. The Coalition High Command Chamber was designed to intimidate. Riley had seen pictures of it in history books, but being here in person was different. The ceiling rose 50 feet above her head, covered in star maps showing every Coalition world. Around the circular room sat representatives from all 23 member species, each in their designated chief section with their flags and symbols displayed prominently. Riley stood at the center in her dress uniform, which suddenly felt too tight. Beside her, separated by 10 feet of open floor, stood General Torvak in full military regalia. He hadn't looked at her once since they'd entered the chamber. His jaw was locked, his scales a neutral gray, and his cybernetic arm hung perfectly still at his side. At the head of the chamber sat the Arbiter, a silicate named Kaith whose crystalline body refracted light in strange patterns. Silicates were known for their absolute neutrality and inability to lie, which made them perfect for judicial roles. This inquiry is now in session. Kaith's voice resonated like struck glass. We are here to review the incident that occurred at the Galactic Military Academy between General Torvak of the Dracan Empire and Cadet Riley Bennett of Earth. General, you may present your account first. Torvak stepped forward, his boots clicking on the polished floor. When he spoke, his voice was controlled, professional, showing none of the anger Riley had seen yesterday. Arbiter, representatives, I accept full responsibility for the incident. I initiated the challenge to Cadet Bennett as a test of human readiness for combat roles. My assessment was that human physiology presents significant limitations for military service. I sought to demonstrate these limitations in a controlled environment. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. The Dracan delegation looked uncomfortable. The Earth representatives, 3 humans in diplomatic uniforms, kept their expressions carefully neutral. The match proceeded according to Academy rules. Torvak continued. Cadet Bennett utilized techniques I was unfamiliar with. She won fairly. However, I maintain that the underlying question remains valid. Are humans physically capable of serving effectively in coalition military forces? Kaith's crystalline eyes fixed on Torvak. You're saying you intentionally challenged a cadet to prove a political point about her species. I am saying I tested a hypothesis, Arbiter. The results were unexpected, but data is data. Thank you, General. You may return to your position. Kaith turned to Riley. Cadet Bennett, please present your account. Riley's mouth was dry. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her, not just in this room, but across the galaxy. Ambassador Stevens had warned her that this session was being broadcast live to every Coalition world. What she said next would be recorded in history books. She stepped forward. Arbiter, I was sitting in the observation deck during a normal training session when General Torvak arrived. He reviewed tactical footage that included my performance. He then questioned why humans were admitted to the Coalition and suggested we were too weak for military service. When I attempted to explain that humans contribute differently, he challenged me to a sparring match. Did you wish to accept this challenge? No, Arbiter. I felt it was inappropriate given our rank difference. But General Torvak framed my refusal as cowardice and suggested it would prove his point about human weakness. I felt I had no choice but to accept. Kaith's light pattern shifted. Please describe the match itself. Riley took a breath. This was the important part. The match lasted approximately 50 seconds total. For the first 47 seconds, I focused on defense and observation. General Torvak is an experienced warrior with superior strength and reach. Fighting him directly would have been foolish. So you ran from him? This came from a Dracan representative, his scales flushed dark with obvious anger. I analyzed him. Riley corrected calmly. I studied his patterns, his movement preferences, his physical limitations. Every fighter has tells, weaknesses, even the best ones. Especially the best ones, actually because they've relied on the same successful patterns for years. Several representatives leaned forward. Even Torvak turned slightly to look at her, his expression unreadable. In the final 3 seconds, I executed a counter technique. I used a nerve strike to temporarily disrupt General Torvak's coordination, then redirected his momentum. He fell. The match ended. I immediately offered to help him up as a sign of respect. A nerve strike, Keith repeated. You studied Dracan physiology specifically? I study all physiology, Arbiter. Xenobiology is required curriculum. I paid attention. One of the Earth representatives, a woman Riley recognized as Ambassador Stevens, stood. Arbiter, if I may address the larger question here. General Torvak asked whether humans are fit for military service. I would argue that Cadet Bennett demonstrated exactly why we are. We don't match other species in raw strength. We never will. But we excel at adaptation, pattern recognition, and using knowledge as a weapon. A Krellian admiral interrupted. With respect, Ambassador, one cadet defeating one general in a controlled match proves very little. It could be luck. It wasn't luck, Sergeant Dran's voice boomed from the gallery. The Vortian instructor had been called as a witness. I've taught combat tactics for 15 years. I watched that match 5 times. Cadet Bennett executed a perfect analytical counterstrike. She let her opponent establish his patterns, identified his weaknesses, and exploited them with precision. That's not luck. That's excellence. The chamber erupted in argument. Draken representatives shouted that one example meant nothing. Earth representatives countered that humanity had survived as a species through intelligence, not strength. Other species delegates took sides or tried to mediate. Keith's voice cut through the noise like a blade. Silence. The room instantly quieted. Silicates might be neutral, but they commanded absolute respect. General Torvak, Keith said, you stated the match raised questions about human military capacity. Cadet Bennett, do you wish to address those questions? This was it. The moment Ambassador Stevens had prepared her for. Riley looked at Torvak, then at the assembled representatives, then directly at Keith. Yes, Arbiter. General Torvak is right about one thing. Humans are physically weaker than most coalition species. Our bones break more easily. We lack natural armor or weapons. We tire faster than some species and slower than others. These are facts. The Earth delegation looked worried. Where's she going with this? But the general's question assumes that military effectiveness is only about physical strength. It isn't. Earth has a saying, the strongest sword isn't always the sharpest. We survived on our planet not by being the apex predator, but by being smart enough to outsmart every apex predator that tried to eat us. Riley gestured to her own body. This frame carried me through 2 years of academy training. It let me complete scenarios that some physically stronger species failed. Not because I'm special, but because I approach problems differently. When a Krellian sees an obstacle, they break through it. When a Dracan sees an enemy, they overpower them. When a human sees a problem, we look for the angle, the weakness, the solution that doesn't require us to be stronger than we are. She turned to face Torvak directly. You've fought in wars, General. Real wars. You've seen countless battles. But in all that experience, did you ever face an opponent who fought like I did? Who studied you, adapted to you, and beat you with information instead of strength? Torvak's scales rippled through several colors. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then, slowly, he shook his head. No, give it. I have not. That's what humans bring to the coalition, Riley continued, addressing the whole chamber now. We're the species that looks at a problem everyone else solved with strength and asks, but what if we tried it differently? We're not going to outpunch a Dracan or outlift a Vortian. We're going to find a third option nobody else thought of. Keith's crystalline form seemed to pulse with light. You are saying human weakness is actually a form of strength? I'm saying it forced us to get creative. Species that can rely on raw power do. Species that can't have to innovate or die. Humans innovata. We're still here, and we can teach other coalition species to think the way we think, just like they can teach us their strengths. The chamber fell silent again, but this time it was thoughtful rather than tense. Riley could see representatives whispering to each other, considering her words. Finally, Keith spoke. This inquiry will recess for deliberation. Both parties will be notified of our decision. As the chamber emptied, Riley found herself face to face with Torvak in the hallway. The general studied her for a long moment. You fight with your mind, he said quietly. I did not expect that. Most people don't, sir. That's kind of the point. Riley spent the next 3 days in a strange limbo. She wasn't confined to quarters anymore, but she wasn't exactly free either. Everywhere she went on campus, conversation stopped. Cadets stared. Some approached her for autographs or photos. Others gave her a wide berth like she carried some kind of contagious controversy. The human contingent treated her like a hero. David Park had started a betting pool on what the high command decision would be. Other human cadets wanted to know her training secrets, as if there was some trick they could learn to replicate what she'd done. But the alien reactions were more complex. Some species, particularly the smaller or less physically imposing ones, looked at her with something like hope. A Telcree cadet, barely 4 feet tall with delicate wings, had thanked her quietly in the cafeteria. You showed them size doesn't matter, she'd whispered. Thank you. Others were hostile. A group of Dracan cadets made sure Riley saw them practicing combat techniques specifically designed to counter nerve strikes. Krellian students muttered about tricks and coward tactics when she passed. The Vortians mostly seemed thoughtful, discussing the match's implications in their methodical way. On the 4th day, the summons came. Riley was called to Commander Vrel's office along with General Torvak. When she arrived, the general was already there, standing at attention. Vrel looked exhausted, his skin a dull blue-gray. The High Command has reached their decision, Vrel said without preamble. He activated his desk display, and Arbiter Katha's crystalline face appeared. The Silicate's voice filled the room. After extensive deliberation, the Coalition High Command has reached the following conclusions. First, General Torvak's actions in challenging Cadet Bennett were inappropriate given rank difference and violated several protocols regarding instructor-student interactions. However, given that the challenge was accepted and conducted under official Academy rules with proper safety measures, no formal disciplinary action will be taken. Torvak's expression didn't change, but Riley saw his cybernetic hand clench slightly. Second, Cadet Bennett's conduct during and after the match was exemplary. She demonstrated tactical excellence, self-control, and proper military bearing. No disciplinary action is warranted. Riley felt relief wash over her, but Kath wasn't finished. Third, and most significantly, this incident has highlighted a critical gap in Coalition military training. Our current programs emphasize the strengths of physically dominant species while inadequately addressing alternative tactical approaches. The High Command has therefore authorized the creation of a new cross-species tactical training program. This program will teach techniques of analysis, adaptation, and asymmetric combat to all Coalition forces. Vrel's skin shifted to bright purple, the color of shock in his species. Cadet Riley Bennett is hereby assigned to develop this program's core curriculum. She will hold the temporary rank of training specialist and report directly to the Academy Commandant. She will select a staff of instructors from various species to assist in program development. Riley's jaw dropped. She was a second-year cadet. They were putting her in charge of developing curriculum for the entire Coalition military. General Torvak. Kath continued, and the general straightened even more if that was possible. You will serve as senior military advisor to this program. Your combat experience and strategic knowledge are considered essential to ensuring the curriculum remains practical for real military applications. This assignment is mandatory and will last a minimum of 1 standard year. The display went dark. Silence filled the office. Vrel spoke first. You're both dismissed. Report to Conference Room 7 at 0800 tomorrow. That's where your office will be located. Resources and staff allocations are already being processed. Riley and Torvak saluted and left together, walking in awkward silence down the corridor. Finally, the general stopped and turned to face her. They're making us work together, he said flatly. Yes, sir. You understand what this means? I questioned your species' fitness for service, challenged you publicly, and was defeated. Now, I must help you teach others your methods. I understand it's not ideal, sir. Torvak's scales shifted through several colors, emotions Riley couldn't read. Not ideal, he repeated. That is one way to phrase it. He paused, then added, I watched the footage of our match 17 times. Each time, I saw something new you did. Small adjustments, minor movements. You were 3 steps ahead of me the entire time. Riley didn't know what to say to that. I have fought in 43 major battles. Torvak continued. Defeated enemies across 6 sectors. Commanded fleets, led ground assaults, earned every scar on this body through victory. And a human cadet half my size defeated me in 3 seconds using techniques I didn't know existed. Sir, I was wrong. The words seemed to cost him physically. About humans. About you. About what constitutes military effectiveness. I base my opinions on assumptions, not data. That is the behavior of a fool, not a general. Riley stared at him. This was not what she'd expected. Tomorrow, when we begin this assignment, I will bring my experience. But I will also listen. Will you teach me how you think, Cadet Bennett? Not the techniques, but the mindset behind them. Riley thought about her family, about generations of humans who'd survived by being smarter instead of stronger, about her mother's lessons and her grandfather's wisdom, about the fundamental human truth that there's always another way if you look hard enough. Yes, sir, I can do that. Torvak nodded once, crisp and military. Good. I suspect I will be a difficult student. I've spent my entire life learning that strength wins battles. Unlearning that will not be easy. Strength does win battles, sir. But there are different kinds of strength. Something that might have been a smile crossed Torvak's scarred face. That is what you said in the inquiry chamber. I have been thinking about those words. Fighting with your mind. Using weakness as a weapon. These concepts are foreign to me, but perhaps that is why I need to learn them. Over the next week, Riley discovered that setting up a completely new training program was harder than fighting any general. She and Torvak met every morning in Conference Room 7, which had been converted into a combination office and planning center. The first day was tense. They sat on opposite sides of a large table, a pile of data pads between them containing existing training protocols from all 23 coalition species. Where do we start? Riley asked. Torvak gestured at the data pads. I have reviewed these materials. Most focus on physical conditioning, weapons proficiency, and tactical formations. Standard military training. What's missing? Everything you did to defeat me. Riley pulled out her own notes. The problem is that what I did can't be taught the same way you teach a punch or a shooting stance. It's not a technique, it's a process. Explain. Okay, when you fight, what do you think about? Torvak considered. Target acquisition, strike force, defensive positioning, ending the engagement quickly, right? You're focused on execution. But before I execute anything, I'm gathering data. I'm watching how my opponent moves, looking for patterns, identifying weaknesses. That's the first step of how humans fight. We treat combat like a puzzle to solve. Puzzles can be solved incorrectly. Sure, that's why the second step is adaptation. If the first solution doesn't work, try another. Humans are really good at thinking on our feet, changing strategies mid-fight. Torvak made a note on his datapad. This is very different from Dracan military philosophy. We believe in overwhelming force applied with precision. Adapt by bringing more force. And that works great when you have the force to bring. But what about smaller species? What about situations where you're outgunned or outnumbered? We fight anyway. Victory or death. Humans prefer victory through cleverness. Death seems like a last resort. For the first time, Torvak actually laughed. It was a harsh, barking sound, but genuine. A practical philosophy. Very well, Cadet Bennett. Teach me about fighting with puzzles. They worked together for hours, Riley explaining concepts that felt natural to her, but were completely alien to Torvak's military background. The general asked endless questions, challenged every assumption, and pushed her to defend her ideas with logic and examples that IT was exhausting. It was also oddly satisfying. By the end of the week, they had a rough framework. The program would teach observation skills, pattern recognition, tactical flexibility, and asymmetric combat theory. It would be mandatory for all Academy cadets and available as advanced training for active duty coalition forces. This will be controversial, Torvak warned. Many will see it as diminishing traditional martial values. Probably, Riley agreed. But the coalition is supposed to unite different species' strengths, right? This is just making sure we include all types of strength. Torvak studied her across the table. You speak like a diplomat, think like a strategist, and fight like a demon. You are a strange creature, Riley Bennett. It was the first time he'd used her first name. 3 months later, Riley stood at the front of Training Hall Alpha, watching as 200 cadets from 17 different species filed in and took their seats. This was the pilot program's first official session. Her stomach was doing backflips to the back of the room. General Torvak leaned against the wall with his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. They'd agreed he would observe the first few classes without participating, letting Riley establish her teaching style without his intimidating presence overshadowing everything. The cadets settled into an uneasy quiet. Riley could see the skepticism on many faces, particularly among the Dracan and Krellian students. A Krellian in the front row, a third-year named Braun, raised his hand before she'd even started. Yes, Riley called on him. With respect, training specialist, why should we learn combat techniques from someone who weighs less than my left arm? The room tensed. This was the question Riley had been expecting since day one. She'd prepared for it. Stand up, Braun, she said calmly. The Krellian stood, towering over his desk. He was nearly 7 feet tall and built like a boulder with legs. How much can you lift? 800 pounds, standard gravity. Impressive. I can lift about 120. You're almost 7 times stronger than me. Riley walked down the aisle toward him. Now, answer this question. If we both need to open a locked door, and you can break it down with pure strength, but I have to pick the lock, which of us gets through faster? Brun frowned. I would. Breaking is faster than picking. Usually, yes. Now, different question. What if the door is alarmed and breaking it triggers security? Then, Brun pushed. Then picking the lock is better. Exactly. Context matters. Your strength is an incredible advantage in the right situation. But it's not the only tool, and sometimes it's not the best tool. Riley gestured to the room. This program isn't about replacing what you already know. It's about adding options. More tools in your kit. A Telkri cadet raised a delicate hand. But what if we don't have physical strength at all? Some of us can't break doors or overpower enemies. Then you're already forced to think creatively, which give you a head start, Riley said. The truth is, every species in this room has been training for combat by emphasizing their natural advantages. Krellians learn to use their strength. Drekans learn to use their armor and reach. Silicates learn to use their crystalline structure. That's good training, but it's incomplete. She pulled up a holographic display showing footage from a historical coalition battle. This is the Battle of Turtis Ridge from the Border Wars. Coalition forces outnumbered the enemy 3-1, had superior firepower and better positions. We lost. Anyone know why? Silence. Even Torvak at the back of the room shifted slightly. We lost because the enemy didn't fight the way we expected. They used guerrilla tactics, hit-and-run attacks, psychological warfare. They made our advantages irrelevant by changing the rules of engagement. The commander who defeated coalition forces that day was physically weaker than almost any coalition species. But she understood that battles aren't won by the strongest fighter. They're won by whoever controls the variables. Riley changed the display to show a simple equation. Combat has 3 primary variables: force, information, and environment. Most species focus on maximizing force. This program teaches you to manipulate all 3. To gather information faster than your opponent. To control the environment to neutralize enemy advantages. To win fights before they become physical confrontations. Braun raised his hand again. Can you give an example? Sure. My fight with General Torvak. The room went completely silent. Every eye turned briefly toward Torvak, then back to Riley. The general is stronger than me, more experienced, better trained. In a straight fight with no thinking involved, he wins every time. So I didn't fight straight. For the first 47 seconds, I gathered information. How does he move? Which leg does he favor? How does a cybernetic arm compare to his organic one? What patterns does he default to under pressure? Riley pulled up footage of the match. She'd gotten permission from Torvak to use it for teaching purposes, though it had taken him a while to agree. Watch here. He throws a hook with his right. I duck, but I'm not just dodging. I'm testing his reaction speed, measuring the power behind his strikes, cataloging his technique. She fast-forwarded slightly. Here, he connects with my shoulder. That hurt, but it also gave me information about his strike force and confirmed he was holding back slightly because I'm smaller. He's still thinking of this as a training exercise, not a real fight. When did it become a real fight? Asked a silicate student. When I stopped retreating. Watch. Riley showed the moment she planted her feet. That change in body language signaled I was done gathering data. For Torvak, trained in traditional combat, that meant the real fight was starting. But for me, the fight was already over. I had all the information I needed. The physical confrontation was just execution. She showed the final 3 seconds in slow motion. The nerve strike, the pivot, the use of his own momentum against him. 70% of that technique is information. 20% is knowing Dracan physiology. 10% is physical execution. Most fighters reverse that ratio. They make combat 90% physical, 10% mental. Humans survive by flipping the script. Torvak's voice rumbled from the back of the room. She is correct. I have reviewed this footage perhaps 50 times now. Each time I see something new, small choices she made that I did not recognize as tactical decisions. By the time I understood she was winning, I had already lost. The cadets turned to stare at him. The great General Torvak, admitting defeat not just physically but intellectually. This program will teach you to think as she thinks, Torvak continued, pushing off from the wall and walking to the front. To see combat not as a contest of force, but as a puzzle with multiple solutions. I did not believe such thinking had military value. I was wrong. He stood beside Riley, the size difference almost comical. I am twice her size, 4 times her weight, and have 40 years more combat experience. Yet she defeated me in seconds because she understood what I did not. That knowing your enemy is more powerful than overpowering your enemy. Braun stood again. General, with respect, isn't this kind of thinking dishonorable? Fighting with tricks instead of strength. I thought so too, Torvak said. Then I asked myself, if I face an enemy in battle, do I owe them honor, or do I owe my soldiers victory? Do I owe my people my pride, or their lives? Honor is valuable. Victory is necessary. This program teaches you to achieve both. Riley took over again. Here's what we're going to do in this program. First, you'll learn observation techniques. How to read body language, identify patterns, assess threats in real time. Second, you'll study xenobiology and psychology of all coalition species. Know their strengths, but more importantly, know their limitations. Third, you'll practice adaptive thinking. We'll throw scenarios at you that can't be solved with your natural advantages. You'll learn to think sideways. She pulled up a training schedule. This is a 16-week course. It's going to be hard. Not physically hard like combat training, but mentally hard. You're going to have to unlearn some things you've been taught your whole lives. Some of you will hate it. Some of you will fail. But those who succeed will be better warriors, better strategists, and better coalition soldiers. A human cadet in the 3rd row raised her hand. Training specialist. What if we already think this way? What do humans get out of this program? Perspective, Riley answered. Humans are good at adaptive thinking because we had to be, but we have our own blind spots. We tend to overthink when sometimes direct action is better. We hesitate when we should commit. Working with other species will show you what human thinking looks like from the outside. Trust me, it's educational. The session continued for another hour. Riley walked them through the first observation exercise, pairing cadets from different species and having them analyze each other's combat stances. The room filled with discussion, argument, and gradually understanding. When the session ended, cadets filed out talking animatedly. Riley sagged against the desk, suddenly exhausted. That went well, Torvak said, gathering up data pads. You think so? I felt like I was drowning the whole time. You commanded their attention. You answer their challenges without becoming defensive. You show them respect while maintaining authority. That is teaching. Riley looked up at him. 3 months ago, you thought humans were too weak for military service. Now you're complimenting my teaching. 3 months ago, I was a fool. Torvak's scales shifted to a lighter gray, which Riley had learned meant he was relaxed. I have learned more in these months working with you than in my previous 5 years. You have shown me that strength comes in forms I never considered. That makes you dangerous, Cadet Bennett. In the best possible way. I'm still a cadet technically. This training specialist thing is temporary. For now. Torvak moved toward the door, then paused. The coalition is changing. Humans are showing us that power is not just about domination. It is about understanding. That is a valuable lesson. Perhaps the most valuable lesson. After he left, Riley sat alone in the empty training hall. She thought about her family back on Earth, about her mother's dojo and her father's ranch and her grandfather's stories. They'd all taught her the same lesson in different ways. Survive first, win second, and never apologize for being smarter than your strong point 3 months ago. She just wanted to prove she belonged in the academy. Now she was teaching coalition soldiers a new way to think about combat. Her methods, her human methods, were being distributed across the galaxy. Her communicator buzzed. A message from command. 16 more coalition academies wanted to implement the program. Could she develop training materials for remote instruction? Riley smiled and started typing her response. Humans had survived on Earth by being adaptable, by thinking differently, by refusing to play games where the rules favored someone else. Now she was going to teach the entire galaxy how to do the same thing. Outside the training hall windows, ships launched toward distant stars, carrying soldiers who would soon learn that the greatest weapon wasn't strength or speed or armor. IT was the ability to think 3 steps ahead of everyone else. And humanity had been doing that for millions of years.